In this lecture, we want to talk about gains from trade and why it is that you can always gain from trading with other people, even if you're better at doing everything than that person is. So this is going to revolve around the idea of scarcity, and that because of scarcity, there's going to be trade-offs. And different people are going to have different trade-offs because of their inherent ability, their inherent skills. And by exploiting those differences in the trade-off, you can gain from trading. Everybody can gain from trading. Now, before we get into the meat of it, we need to cover two basic concepts. It's going to be production possibility frontier, and we're going to bring up opportunity cost again. Okay, production possibility frontier. We're going to assume there's only two goods in the economy. Now, this is a simplification, but it's going to make our life easier, and we can still gain some insights into the real world. So we're going to say there's only two goods, and the production possibility frontier is going to display the trade-off inherent in those two goods. So say there's only two goods in the world. Say there's only soy and corn. Okay, and this line right here is a production possibility frontier, right? I'm inventing this. I'm saying this is the most you can produce. Okay? On this line is efficient. If producing within here means you're not using all your resources, you could be producing more. You can produce anything within this line, but you want to produce on the line. Why would you not want to produce as much as you can? And outside of that line is impossible. It's the production possibility frontier. That line is the frontier. You can't go past that, okay? Now, of course, this is a straight line. It's a very simple one, but you're going to be working with straight lines mostly because we don't expect you to know calculus, any high-end math. This is an intro course, but you're still going to give you some insights into trade. Okay, so we want to look more specifically at this trade-off. Remember, opportunity cost is the cost of the trade-off, right? If you want less corn, more soy, you have to give up some corn. The amount of corn you give up for more soy, that is the opportunity cost of that soy. And it's represented within this line, in the slope. So let's put a couple points up on here. Okay, we have points A and point B. And we want to show that this line, this production possibility frontier, the slope of that line is the opportunity cost. Okay, let's say we want to go from point B to point A. Okay, let's talk about the opportunity cost of gaining more corn. Right, we're going from B to A, we're going to go from 5 to 8, we're getting more corn. So let's talk about the opportunity cost of that corn. Now, just like when you go to the store or you go to the gas station and buy gas, what is the cost of gas? Well, it's dollars per gas, right? The thing you're buying goes on the bottom. So if we're talking about the opportunity cost for corn, corn is going to go on the bottom. Going to 5 to 8, we're gaining 3 corn. How much soy are we losing? We're losing 5. Okay, so our opportunity cost of, say, a pound of corn is 5/3 a pound of soy. Okay, now let's do the opposite. Let's say we go from A to B, and let's look at the opportunity cost of soy. Well, how much soy are we gaining? We're gaining 5 soy. And remember, we're talking about the opportunity cost of soy, so soy is going to go on the bottom now. And to gain that 5 soy, we have to give up that 3 corn. Three-fifths. Now, important thing to see here is that the opportunity cost of one is just the reciprocal of the opportunity cost of the other. It's the way it's always going to be in these simple examples that you have. Okay, going the slope, it's just a slope. Going from one way is just the reciprocal of going the other way. So once you have the opportunity cost of corn, you don't need to really work it out to find what the opportunity cost of soy is. Just take the reciprocal of that 5/3, get your 3/5. That's your opportunity cost of soy. Okay, so this production possibility frontier shows the most I can make, any bundle of the two goods. The slope of it represents the opportunity cost, the trade-off of taking more soy, less corn, more corn, less soy. Okay, now I said that this is simple, but we're going to be using straight lines. But just to give you a feel for it, let's talk about something a little more realistic. Now this straight line, the slope is constant. So we would say this line, this production possibility frontier, represents a constant marginal opportunity cost. Because your opportunity cost for corn, say, does not change anywhere on this graph. It's constant. Now in reality, that's probably not going to be the case. Most things in real life are going to have what you might call, what we say is a increasing marginal opportunity cost. So let's put a quick graph up here to get a sense of what I mean by that. So say in this world there's only two goods, there's guns and butter. And this is going to represent an increasing marginal opportunity cost. Now let's put a couple points up here to see, so we can see this, how this comes out of this. Now, say we start with 0 guns and all butter. Or almost, we're starting at A, we have a little bit of guns but a lot of butter. Okay, now what's the opportunity cost of getting more guns, going from A to B? Well look, we only give up that little bit of butter to get all those guns. Now what about if we go farther and we want more guns? All of a sudden we're giving up a lot more to get about the same. So the opportunity cost is increasing, right? This bowed out production possibility frontier represents an increasing marginal opportunity cost. Now this is going to be more realistic, but we're going to be working with the straight lines because it's easier to work with, and even though the model is simpler, it's still going to allow us to gain some insights into reality. Okay, so now we want to put up an example of, say, you and a friend are going to have 2 goods, and you're going to have your own, each is going to have your own production possibility frontier. And in this example, we're going to say you are better at producing both corn and soy, but we're going to show that you can still gain from trading with them, and they can gain from trading with you. So let's put this up real quick and walk through an example. Say both have corn and soy, okay? So you could produce at the most 20 corn, the most 30 soy if that's all you did, and they're going to be worse at both. So if they produced only soy, they could make 20, but if you produced only soy, you could make 30. You have the absolute advantage in soy. If you produced only corn, you could make 20. If they produced only corn, they could only make 10. Again, you have the absolute advantage in corn. Absolute advantage just means being able to make more of it. But what's going to matter for trade is not absolute advantage. What's going to matter is comparative advantage. And comparative advantage is going to hinge on opportunity cost. Comparative advantage is having a lower opportunity cost. And if you have a comparative advantage, you're going to want to specialize in that in trade. And like we said before, the opportunity cost of any 2 goods are going to be reciprocals of each other. And because of that, you cannot have the comparative advantage in both goods. You can have the absolute advantage in both goods, but not the comparative advantage in both goods. Therefore, you could always gain from trading. Okay, now to help out a little bit more, we need to say, you know, you could be producing and consuming anywhere on these lines, so let's put up 2 points to help us later on create this trade and show that everybody can gain from trading. So let's say you produce and consume 12-12. Let's put that up there so we don't forget, okay? You can produce at the most 20 corn, the most 30 soy. You choose to produce 12-12. Let's say they choose to produce 8-4. Okay? They can produce at the most 10 corn, at the most 20 soy. They choose to produce 8 and 4. Okay, now first step we need to do before we can create a trade and show that both people can gain from it, we need to first look at your opportunity costs. All right, let's start with your opportunity cost for corn. Okay, remember, cost of corn, corn's gonna go on the bottom. Say you started at all soy, went to all corn, how much corn are you gonna gain? 20 corn. How much soy are you going to give up? You're going to give up 30, all 30 of your soy. So your opportunity cost for corn is 3 halves. Now let's look at their opportunity cost for corn. If they go from no corn to all corn, how much corn do they gain? That goes on the bottom. Opportunity cost of corn, corn goes on the bottom. 10 corn. How much soy do they give up to get that? They give up all 20 of their soy. So their opportunity cost is 2. Okay, who has the comparative advantage here? Remember, comparative advantage is the lower opportunity cost. Well, 3 halves is less than 2. You're going to have the comparative advantage in corn. Now, what's your opportunity cost for soy? Well, remember, we don't need to go through all this. We know it's just the reciprocal. So, who has the comparative advantage in soy? Well, they do. 1 half is less than 2/3. So, the juxt of this is that you're going to specialize in corn and trade, they're going to specialize in soy and trade. You both specialize where you have the comparative advantage. Okay, so now what we need to do is we need to create a trade. Okay, so I'm going to erase this graph up here to make some space. But we're going to remember that their starting place was 12 corn, 12 soy. They were 8 corn, 8 soy, 4 soy, right? Because we don't want to make anybody worse off than anyone. We don't want someone to end up with less soy than they have before. Who knows? Maybe they really like that 8 corn and they can't live without it. Now, they could get more corn or more soy, but we don't want to leave anybody with less of any one of the goods, okay? So we want to remember the starting point. Okay, so important thing, this is going to be very important. When you trade, the terms of trade, the amount of soy for corn that you trade, that ratio has to lie in between the two people's opportunity costs. So if we're talking about soy for corn, soy on top, corn on the bottom, that ratio has to lie in between 3 halves and 2. Okay, now let's make these numbers a little bigger so that we can find a number in between it. All right, let's go to fourths so we can get a number in between it. If we go 3 halves to fourths, what do we get? Get 6/4, right? The ratio is the same, I just made them bigger. 2, what is 2 in the terms of fourths? It's 8/4. Now, what is a number in between 6/4 and 8/4? 7/4, soy over corn. Now, this is a fair trade. Why is this a fair trade? Why can both people gain? Why do both people like this trade ratio? Why do we like trading 7 soy for 4 corn? Let's look at it from your perspective. If you were to produce it on your own, if you gave up 4 corn, you would get 6 soy. But by trading with your friend, if you give up 4 corn, you get 7 soy. You're better off. Hey, that's better than doing it on my own. I'd rather trade, right? Now look at your friend. For them to get 4 corn, they used to have to give up 8 soy, right? Now they only have to give up 7 trading with you. So hey, they want to do that too. They like trading with you too. Both of you would rather trade at this trade ratio, 7 soy for 4 corn, than trade off on your own production possibility frontier. Now, this is the trade ratio that works, but that doesn't mean this is the trade that's going to work. Okay, let's take a quick look at this. You started out with 12 soy, right? That's where you were at before any trade when you were producing on your own. Now, if you specialize in just corn, and only trade this ratio, well, then you end up with only 7 soy. That's less soy than you had before. Yeah, you have more corn, because you would make 20 and only give him 4, and you'd have 16 corn, but you have less soy than you had before. So we don't like that. Same thing with him. We don't want to hurt you in any one of the goods you had before. But this trade ratio still works. But let's double both the goods. Let's trade 14 soy for 8 corn. We're going to show that this makes everybody better off. Okay, remember, when you produced only corn, you could make 20 corn. If you trade him 8 corn, how much corn do you end up with? 12 corn, and he gives you how much? Trade ratio, 14 soy. Well, look, compare that to where you started off for him, you're better. You have 2 more soy than you had before. You could not have consumed that on your own. You were consuming 12 corn, 12 soy. You couldn't magically make 2 more soy. It was beyond your possibility frontier. It was beyond your production ability. But now you are consuming there because of the gains from trade. Now, what about your friend over here? If you recall, when they were producing only soy, they could make 20 soy. They're going to give you 14 soy. That's the trade. It's going to leave them with 6 soy, and how much corn are you going to give them? Well, just look at the trade. You're giving them 8 corn. Now, how's that compared to where they started? Well, they still had their 8 corn, but now they have 6 soy instead of 4 soy. So again, they were doing 8 corn, 4 soy. Now they're consuming 2 more soy than they could have before. That 8-6 was beyond their possibility. They could not have done that on their own. So both of you are now consuming more soy, the same amount of corn, than you were before. And this is because of the gains from trade. Both of you gained by trading. Right? You specialized in where you had the comparative advantage, and you traded. And now you're both better off. Okay? And the key thing to remember here is, first, find the opportunity cost. Define and find out who has the comparative advantage and what good. And the comparative advantage is where you have the lower opportunity cost. Now remember, you cannot have a comparative advantage in both goods, so you can always gain from trading. And then the trade ratio, the amount of the 2 goods that you're trading, that ratio should lie in between the 2 people's opportunity costs. Okay, if you do those things, you can always build a trade that will make each party better off. And this is the magic, if you want to call it magic, as economists might like to call it magic, the magic of the gains from trade. Just by specializing in trading, everybody can live and be better off. Now, this is how the market system works, right? Everybody works in their own works to their own advantage, does what they're good at, looks out for themselves, and everybody ends up being better off, right? You specialize in trade. If you do that, it increases everybody's standard of living, right? Everybody can consume outside of their production possibility frontier. Now, this is a great thing, right? Everybody can live better than they possibly could have on their own. Now, all this takes place in markets, right? Markets are where people come together and trade or sell specific products. We have a couple type of products of markets. We have product markets and we have factor markets. Now, most of you interact in both. Product markets are where you go and buy final consumer goods. You go buy a TV, a shirt, shoes. Those are product markets, right? You're consuming final products from producers. There's also factor markets, such as the labor market. That's where you, for example, sell your labor to a firm. They're purchasing from you your labor. But what your labor is to them is a factor of production, because they use your labor to create those products, right? They use your labor to create products they then sell to you. So you give them your labor through the factor market, they create goods and sell you the goods through the product market. Now, on the factor market, there's a couple key factors of production. You have labor, which is you working for a firm. You have capital, which is what we call the plant, the equipment. You have natural resources, land, energy, and you also have what you might call entrepreneurial ability. The ability to someone to bring labor, capital, natural resources together and actually produce a good that people want. Right? So all these things come together through trade, and a lot of times you'll see this circular diagram of the economy. So I want to put this up real quick and just talk about a few key points about it. Okay, so there's two main parts, right? There's households, you buying and selling, and then there's firms, selling you goods. Got your households, and you have your firms. Remember we said there's two types of markets, product markets and factor markets. Okay, and these are all going to interact. All right, this is a circular diagram of how the economy works. Now let's talk about how money works, how money flows through the economy. Well, say you have money through the product market, you give it to firms, you buy their products. Then through the factor market, they give it back to you as wages. Okay, now what about goods and services and actual factors of production? Well, they move in the other way, right? Households, through the factor market, give firms their labor. And then firms, through the product market, go back and give households the products and the goods they buy. So this, you can see the circular flow of how the economy works through markets. Now, of course, there's a little bit missing I want to make sure you don't forget about. There is government here somewhere. Right? Government is in the middle of this diagram somewhere. Right? It has rules, regulations. It upholds property rights. It upholds and enforces contracts, and we'll talk in just a second about how important that is. So without the government in the middle, this doesn't quite work as good. Now, one more key thing a lot of textbooks leave out is, where does all this happen? Well, the economy does not live, where does it live? It lives on Earth, right? All this happens on the planet, in the ecosystem, in the environment. Right? So it's a closed system. It's contained within the planet. Right? And where do these natural resources come from? Well, they come from this squared off ecosystem environment into the factor market. Right? Natural resources go in, and of course, what comes out of this, not everything is consumed, it keeps going. What comes out of the economy? What do you throw away every day? What goes into the atmosphere? Pollution, waste, trash. Now, this simple diagram right here is a fairly good model of how the economy works. Another big point here is what prices do in a market economy. Right? Money goes around, factors, production, goods go around, but prices act as a very important signal of information. If something is very costly, you go to the store, you buy something with gold in it, it's very costly. That reflects the scarcity of the good, or of how hard it is to make. If something's very difficult to make, it's going to cost more because it's reflecting the scarcity and how hard it is, how much labor it takes to make that good. So the price conveys to you some information about how it gets produced. Similarly to producers, the price can reflect how much in demand a good is. Say only one firm makes these little black markers, and everybody wants them, and they start bidding the price up because the firm can't make the markers fast enough. Well, other firms will say, hey, look how much those markers are selling for. It's signaling to them how important and how much people are in demand for this marker. Okay? So prices signal and convey information throughout the economy. An important thing I mentioned about the government is it's very important for private property rights to be enforced, for this all to work. So if I have money and I invest in a store, I put a storefront up and I put goods out that I want to sell to people, I create and want to sell these goods, and someone can just come in and steal my goods, and I have no recourse to the police to enforce my property rights for those goods, why would I ever risk my money to do that? So without being able to enforce private property rights, without that, people are not going to put their goods, their services at risk. Similarly, you need the government to enforce contracts. So if you go to Nissan and you buy a car, you sign a contract saying, hey, I'll pay you $350 for the next 5 years, and they let you drive off with the car. Now, what if you decide to never pay them and they have no recourse to the courts to enforce that contract? Well, pretty soon you're going to see people are going to stop giving loans for new cars, right? So if you can't enforce contracts and enforce your private property rights, this market system pretty quickly breaks down, which is what you see in a lot of developing nations that don't develop very much, right? There isn't much enforcement of contracts. The government is weak. They don't enforce private property rights, and development is very hard to come by because of the reasons I just talked about. So a brief overview. You can always gain from trade. The gains from trade come from scarcity and the fact that different people have different trade-offs. The trade-offs are reflected in the opportunity cost, right? The opportunity cost is where comparative advantage comes from. You can have an absolute advantage in everything, but not a comparative advantage in everything. Whoever has the lower opportunity cost, they have the comparative advantage. That's what you want to specialize in, and you trade. Important thing, the trade, remember the ratio of that trade needs to lie in between the two people's opportunity costs. You do that, you can conceive of a trade that will make both people better off. That's basically how the market system works through markets. We have product markets, factor markets. Remember, factor markets talk about labor, capital, natural resources, entrepreneurial ability. This is a broad diagram of how you can talk about how the market and the economies work together and how everything flows through. The importance of the role of price of information, the importance of private property rights and their enforcement, and also enforcement of contracts. So read through your chapter, make sure you understand all these concepts, maybe look at a few more examples of some actual trading, some gains from trade, look at an opportunity cost, devising a trade. And the next section we'll talk about is basic supply and demand and where price and equilibrium comes from.